Hey horror fans, Bored now back with you. On this video I'm going to be talking about Wolfman. So this is a new cinema release, a new Blumhouse movie, and the latest from Lira now, who has a pretty solid track record when it comes to horror movies overall, and having done a few years back his modern post-Me Too take on the Universal classic The Invisible Man, he's now gone for an updating of another Universal classic monster movie, and that is The Wolfman. And I've got to say, The Wolfman is one of those movies, like the original movies, it's perfectly fine, and it led to a lot of similar type creature feature type movies. It doesn't really stand out to me as much as some Universal monster movies. It doesn't quite hold up as like a classic like some of them do. So it's one of those movies I think maybe you can update and put a fresh new spin on it. A young boy going hunting with his father in the woods, and the father seems quite trigger happy, and he's trying to show his son how to hunt, some of the tricks of the trade, and jumps forward quite a few years, and we pick up with the lead character, who's played by Christopher Abbott, who is now settled in one of the big cities. I think it's New York or something like that. He was born out in the sticks. He's like the young boy we see at the start. Family, so he's got a wife played by Julia Garner, who's a journalist who's like just starting her career off, trying to get her career off the ground. And they've also got a young daughter who's played by Matilda Firth. Lead character's father has recently died. He went missing in the woods years ago and has been assumed dead for years, but it's only now that it's confirmed by letter that his body has been found. The husband and father, Blake, says, why don't we take a trip to the country to where my father was based, got like the cabin in the country. We need to take a bit of time away. And we start to have this horror style plot where they take this trip. They bump into someone who the main character knows from childhood and has known all these years ago. And the film treats him like he could be like a threat, because he is acting quite suspicious. He's acting in quite a passive aggressive way towards like the family, but he turns out to be a red herring. And we then get the monster plot introduced, where there's something on the road going after them, and that becomes most of the movie there, where they retreat to the house, and you kind of get this game of cat and mouse. But as things develop, it turns out then the main character, played by Christopher Abbott, might have become infected by whatever the monster is. This wasn't really that great. Like, this was in many ways a very typical monster type movie. Unlike The Invisible Man, which really had something to say and really put a bit of a fresh spin on that story, this didn't feel to me like it put that much of a fresh spin on the Wolfman story. Like I said, I think there was definitely vibes of the Incredible Hulk a little bit. You had that stuff going on in the background. And that might be one of the problems, is I'm not really sure what else you can do with this story. Like, it doesn't really lend itself to be updated and changed and tweaked in quite the same way as The Invisible Man, where you could really go to town on the sci-fi elements. You could reverse the gender roles a little bit like that movie did. I don't think there's that much you can do with this movie, or to give it like a fresh modern spin. And that's the problem, is I went in maybe expecting to have that. I expected, okay, he did that with The Invisible Man, so he's probably going to try and do that with this. In the end, it just played out as a pretty standard, typical monster type movie. And unfortunately, it wasn't a particularly good one. Like, if the horror held up and the horror pulled me in and like I was really into the characters and the story, then that's fine. I would have enjoyed it and it would have been fine. It is quite an easy watch. Like it's not like a long movie. It goes in quite fast, although the pacing is a little bit weird. Like there's a little bit of stop starting, and there's a little bit of, I think, meandering a little bit when it comes to getting into what the plot actually is. Our other character is going to be like the aggressor. You think, okay, he's been infected. He's going to be like a threat to his family. But for a lot of the movie, there's also this other threat from the outside. And I think just the way it plays out in the end, it doesn't really develop into anything that's satisfying. It's actually quite plodding and a little bit dull. Like it could have done with being a little bit more entertaining, or a bit more of a character thing, a bit more of a flavour to it, because with like a monster movie like this, especially if it's quite a simple monster movie, yeah, you do need a bit of hijinks. I think you do need to have a lighter touch. It took itself a bit too seriously in a way that it didn't really need to, and it suffered as a result. Like the characters just came off as a little bit bland. Family dynamic was quite well done. I think the cast were probably the best thing about it. Julia Garner is an actress I really like, and she's very solid. But I think her part was also underwritten. Like it was a bit, she became a bit of a sounding board and wasn't given that much to do ultimately. I thought the young girl was quite good, but again, I think she was a little bit one note, a bit of a blank slate, and so much of it was about the father and the husband and about what was going on with his stuff. You just never got like a satisfying story, and I think they were fine as characters and fine as like a family, but they just were never great characters that really pulled you in. The Blake character was a bit sort of grumpy and a bit, I don't know, melodramatic and down at times, almost for no reason. Like I think some of the stuff with the daughter, and not as positive as he could have been with her, and I don't know, like I think the actors did a pretty good job, and the character had its moments, but there were times where I didn't really care that much about him because it did feel like he was a bit self-centered. The stuff at the beginning was a little bit random, and like I'm not sure we really needed a flashback. I think you could have just started with the characters in the present day and then introduced a little bit of a backstory, a nice little connection between the father and the daughter, like quite a nice chemistry. And one of the things they play with is that he has a closer bond with her than the Julia Garner character, because her whole thing is that she's off being quite an ambitious journalist and she's quite cut off from her family. Like her career almost demands that she is a bit isolated from them. But then you didn't really get that much development with her character. You didn't get that much of a change. Like over the course of the movie, you could see she cared about her daughter, but there just wasn't that much of a change up or that much character development. The effects were really quite bad at times. They were a bit choppy. Like there was some practical effects, and then there was some CG. A lot of the CG I think was with like blood and gore and things like that. And some of that looked a bit sloppy, but even the practical effects I don't think were that good. Like the film seemed to hold off on this stuff for a long time, and when you finally got to the horror stuff, it just wasn't that well done, and like it felt like it was quite cheap and that they rushed some of the effects. I think a bit half-hearted about it, like the plot and the developments where... So it turns out that the father was alive after all. He'd been infected by something in the woods, and that he was now like a werewolf or a wolfman, however you want to phrase it, and he infected his son. The Julia Garner character just figures that out at one point and just says that to the young daughter to, I think was it Ginger or something, the daughter? Something like that anyway. But she just says, oh, Daddy was infected by his father. And yeah, now he's infected. And she just sort of figures that out quite quickly. It's not like a big dramatic moment in the movie. He figures it out because the other werewolf that comes in, I don't know if werewolf is the right term, but the other creature that breaks into the house, after he kills it, he just sees the name of his father on the creature. It's just a bit random and it's not very well thought out, I don't think. There's also this weird sort of effect they keep coming back to, this blurry type effect, almost like a sci-fi type effect, where it shows you how he's experiencing different emotions, or it's trying to get inside his head, and how he experiences his family. And that stuff was a little bit weird, but I think overall the creature effects weren't very good. Like, it was quite a slow burning movie, but when you got to that stuff, it just wasn't quite there to make the horror scenes that satisfying. And I was just a bit disappointed that there wasn't more to the movie overall. A fun, back to basics horror movie. But at the same time, it felt like they were maybe going for a different take on this kind of story, but in the end they didn't really go far enough with that. Similarities between the Invisible Man, like, it definitely had the feel of that. It had the feel of, okay, this is quite atmospheric. There's certain beats we're doing which are a little bit similar, the way it's shot and some of the music, the way it's quite sort of moody. This 90s neo-noir thing going on a little bit at times. Similar, like, titles, the way the film ends, and certain letters and words are highlighted it's got a certain sort of sheen to it. It's going for another Invisible Man, but the film never quite pulled it off. The film in the end falls quite short of it. I don't think it's terrible. I only see worse films in January, because January is known for a lot of like trashy horror movies being sort of shat out. This at least has a bit of a production to it. It has decent direction and it has a pretty solid cast, but it just doesn't satisfy as a horror movie overall. Like, the effects, I think, do let it down, and the story is just a little bit too half-hearted, and there's just not quite enough there. It's a perfectly okay movie, but it's let down in some key areas. I'll give it 5.5. Probably wait for streaming for this one. My thoughts on Wolfman, the new Blumhouse movie. If you've seen the movie, let me know what you think of it in the comments below. Like and subscribe as all that. I will continue with new horror releases throughout this year. At some point I will catch up with Nosferatu, so that's one I should cover on the channel. Also, I'm looking to cover this new Sophie Thatcher movie called Companions, which I know is expected later in January. I'm also planning on doing Section 31, which is like this straight-to-streaming Star Trek movie with Michelle Yeoh's character. And that comes out next week. So there's quite a few movie reviews coming up on the channel. But thanks for listening. Sign up to channel memberships if you want to help the channel out monetarily. Or you can also support me for just $1 a month on patreon.com/borednow. But keep watching movies. See you soon, guys.